Captain Elias Vorn didn't expect to find life in the wreckage. His ship, the Sparrowlight, hovered over the remains of an ancient battlefield in Sector 9. Once a brutal war zone, now it was just floating metal, dead machines, and silence. Most salvagers avoided it, fearing radiation or unstable tech. But Elias wasn't like most people. He believed every wreck told a story, and sometimes it still had living voices. Inside a twisted alien cruiser, buried under layers of crushed steel and melted walls, Elias's scanner beeped. A weak life sign blinked once, then again. Faint. Fading. He narrowed his eyes. Life in a place like this? Impossible. But he didn't turn away. Wearing a sealed suit, he entered the broken ship. The walls groaned under pressure, and lights flickered like dying stars. Moving carefully, he followed the signal down to a locked chamber. The door was half-sealed, bent from some explosion long ago. Using a plasma cutter, Elias forced it open. Inside, it was cold. The air was thin, and in the center of the room, covered in dust and tangled wires, was a stasis pod. It was cracked. The glass was dirty, but Elias could still see her. A small figure curled up inside. Her skin was pale lavender, her arms thin like twigs. She looked almost human, but her eyes, closed now, were larger, and her hair floated like silk underwater. Chains connected her wrists and ankles to the pod's base. She wasn't sleeping. She was trapped. Elias checked the readings. The pod had failed long ago. She should have been dead, but somehow she clung to life. "No way, I'm leaving you here," he whispered. He opened the pod. The air hissed out. The girl didn't move. Gently, he broke the chains. Carefully, respectfully. When he lifted her into his arms, she flinched, eyes still shut. Her breathing was shallow. Back on the Sparrowlight, his AI assistant, Cora, scanned her condition. "She is alive," Cora reported. "Severe weakness, malnutrition, psychological trauma likely, language unknown." Elias sighed. "Can we stabilize her?" "Yes, but recovery will take time." They placed her in the ship's medical bay. Elias sat nearby, watching. Her breathing grew steadier, but her sleep was not peaceful. Her face twitched, hands trembling as if she was still in chains. He didn't leave her side that night. 3 days passed. The alien girl opened her eyes on the 4th. Big, shining, silver-blue eyes full of confusion and fear. She tried to sit up, panicked, then froze when she saw Elias. He raised his hands slowly. "It's okay," he said gently. "You're safe." She didn't understand the words. But something in his voice calmed her. Cora displayed a soft image of food and water on a screen beside her. The girl blinked, then looked at the tray nearby. Carefully, she reached for it. She ate slowly, as if unsure it was real. Afterward, Elias showed her how to say water, food, and safe. She listened but didn't speak. Not yet. When night came, she followed him. He stopped at his door and pointed to a small guest room. "You can rest here," he offered. She looked inside the room. Clean, simple, quiet. Then she looked back at him. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head. Elias frowned. "You don't want to sleep here?" She stepped closer to him, then sat on the floor near his door, like a scared animal waiting for safety. Elias sighed. "All right, you can stay." He let her rest outside his room that night. In the morning, she was still there. In the days that followed, she stayed close. She walked a step behind him through the ship. When Cora played soft music, she listened quietly. When Elias repaired the engine, she watched closely, curious. She still didn't speak. But slowly, her eyes changed. Less fear, more trust. Elias tried to give her space, but whenever he moved too far, she followed. Even in sleep, She curled near, his quarters like a child afraid of dreams. He didn't mind. Cora said softly one night, "She does not fear you. She fears being alone." Elias nodded. "She's been through something. Horrible. But she's still here. That means she's strong." He sat near her sleeping form, watching the stars outside the window. Somewhere out there, someone had chained this girl like a prisoner. But here, on this quiet ship in the dark of space, she was free. And she wasn't alone anymore. The days on the Sparrowlight passed quietly, but the silence was never lonely. Elias could feel it, the bond forming between him and the alien girl. She didn't speak yet, but her presence was a soft, constant reminder that something precious had been saved. She followed him everywhere, not in a way that demanded attention, but as though she was learning to trust again. When Elias ate, she watched closely, observing every move he made. Sometimes she would reach for the food, a hesitant motion, but her hand would stop midair. The hesitation was always there, but it was slowly fading. It was Cora, his AI assistant, who first suggested they try teaching her. "Captain, she is learning your movements," Cora said one afternoon. "Perhaps she can learn the language as well." Elias looked at the girl sitting quietly by the window, her eyes wide as she studied the stars. Her skin, now slightly healthier, glowed under the ship's soft lights, but her eyes, they still carried a hint of sadness, like she was haunted by memories too dark to escape. "I'll give it a try," Elias said. "Maybe she'll feel more at home, if she can understand us." He started simple, first with basic words. He held up an apple. "Apple," he said. She watched carefully, her dark eyes tracking the motion of his lips. When he handed her the fruit, she hesitated, as if unsure if it was meant for her. But when her fingers touched it, she slowly took a bite. Elias smiled. "Good," he said softly. "Apple." The alien girl's eyes shifted to him, studying his expression. She didn't repeat the word, but her gaze lingered, and for a moment, Elias thought she might say something, anything, but she didn't. Instead, she ate slowly, savoring the fruit. Elias didn't mind. It was enough that she trusted him to take the food. Every day, he taught her new words: water, rest, safe. The words seemed to grow familiar to her, though she didn't speak them yet. But slowly she started to mimic some of the movements. When he held out a glass of water, she copied his motion, bringing it to her lips. When he pointed at her and said, "You," she would touch her chest, looking confused at first, then understanding. Cora noticed the progress too. "She is learning. Faster than I expected," Cora commented one evening. "She seems to be catching on to your language more than I anticipated." Elias nodded. "It's the human connection. I think she wants to understand. She's just scared to speak." One morning, after a quiet breakfast, Elias noticed a change. The girl, who he had come to think of as Sirah, sat on the floor near the door, watching him carefully as he worked. She hadn't stayed as close to him as she usually did. Instead, she was sitting still, her hands resting on her lap. He stepped toward her, crouching down. "Sirah?" he asked gently. She turned her head toward him. Her eyes were wide, but there was something new in them, something different than the fear that had once defined her gaze. "You okay?" Elias asked, concerned. Sirah looked down at her hands, then slowly, with great care, placed them on her chest, pressing them against her heart. Safe," she whispered. Elias's heart skipped a beat. She had spoken. Not perfectly, but she had spoken. "You're safe, Sirah," Elias said, kneeling beside her. "You're safe here." She looked at him, then nodded slowly, her eyes still, filled with uncertainty. But her lips curled slightly. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As days turned to weeks, The quiet moments with Syrah became something Elias cherished. She was learning, growing. There were still nights when she couldn't sleep unless she was close to him. At first, it bothered Elias. He didn't want to make her feel dependent on him, but he also didn't want to push her away. And so, he let her stay near him. He made sure she knew the ship's layout, where her room was, and that she could always come to him when she needed comfort. One evening, after a long day of repairs, Elias sat at the control panel. Syrah was nearby, watching him with quiet fascination. He looked at her and smiled. "You want to try?" he asked, pointing to the control panel. Her eyes widened. "Try?" He nodded. "Yeah? You want to see how to fly this thing?" Syrah didn't answer, but she moved toward him, her curiosity evident. He showed her the basics, how to steer, how to read the instruments. It wasn't much, but it was a step toward independence. She copied his motions, eyes focused on the screen. For a moment, she didn't look like a scared, broken soul, but like someone capable of learning, someone ready to reclaim her future. The hum of the ship was soft around them, and the stars outside seemed to blink with new possibilities. Yai was still quiet, but her presence was no longer marked by fear. It was marked by curiosity, by wonder, and by the trust that Elias had never expected, but was grateful for every day. "I think you're getting the hang of it," Elias said, his voice gentle. Syrah didn't smile, but she did something else. She nodded, and that was enough. The days on the Sparrow Light felt more like weeks. Time seemed to blur as Elias spent more and more of it with Syrah. Every day she grew a little stronger, a little more confident. Yet, no matter how much she changed, there was still something inside her that was haunted by the past. Elias knew it wasn't his fault. She had suffered long before they met. Yet he couldn't help but feel a deep sympathy for the alien girl. Her wide eyes, still cautious, still unsure. Her silence was never empty. He could feel the weight of unspoken thoughts and painful memories hanging around her like a shadow. Syrah had started speaking more often now, though her words were still broken. She would point at things, naming them in her new language, and Elias would nod, proud of her progress. But sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, her eyes would glaze over and she would retreat into a place far away, locked inside herself. Elias knew something wasn't right, but he didn't push her. He knew healing took time. One morning, while Elias was working on some engine repairs, he noticed Syrah sitting by the large viewing window, staring out into the endless stretch of space. Her posture was stiff, her hands pressed together tightly. There was something almost fearful in her stillness, and it made Elias's heart ache. He approached her carefully, sitting down beside her. "Syrah," Elias said softly, his voice calm. "You all right?" She didn't answer immediately, her eyes still fixed on the stars outside. But then, slowly, she turned toward him, her expression blank. Her lips parted, but no words came out. It wasn't the usual silence. This was different, heavy. Elias didn't want to push her, but he couldn't just let it go. "Syrah," he repeated gently. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but if something's bothering you, you can tell me. I'm here." She looked at him, her eyes wide. There was a flicker of fear in them, but also something else, something she couldn't quite express. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Chains," she said, her words shaky. "Chains?" Elias repeated, confused. Syrah nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to her hands. "Chains," she whispered again, clutching her fingers. Together, tightly, as though trying to hold herself together. Elias's heart sank. He realized she wasn't just referring to the physical chains that had bound her in the stasis pod, but something deeper, memories of captivity, of being trapped in ways that couldn't be seen on her skin. He stayed silent for a long time, trying to find the right words. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her that she was free now, but he understood that words didn't always fix things. Sometimes the past stayed with you, no matter how much you wanted to leave it behind. Elias reached out slowly, carefully, not wanting to scare her. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're not chained here, Sirah," he said softly. "You're free. You can go wherever you want. No one is going to lock you up again." Sirah's eyes met his, and for the first time, Elias saw a flicker of something other than fear. It was hope. A tiny spark, but a spark nonetheless. She nodded, but then, as if to remind herself, she placed her hands on her chest again. A gesture that Elias had come to know meant that she was grounding herself, trying to connect with the present moment. I try," she said, her voice still shaky but stronger than before. "You are trying, Sirah," Elias said with a smile. "And you're doing great. Every day, you get stronger. I'm proud of you." She blinked at him as if processing the words, and then, slowly, she reached out, hesitating only for a second before resting her hand on his. It was a simple gesture, but it meant more than words could say. For the first time, Elias felt that Sirah was beginning to trust not just him, but herself, too. Later that day, Elias watched as Sirah practiced using the ship's control panel again. She seemed to enjoy it, though her movements were still cautious. It wasn't about perfecting the ship's systems. It was about the control, the ability to choose. Sirah was learning to make decisions again, something that had been taken from her long ago. Elias respected her space, knowing that while she had come so far, there were still shadows she needed to face alone. But there were also moments when she reached out to him when the weight of her past wasn't enough to keep her from moving forward. It was in these moments that Elias saw the girl he had rescued, not just the broken being he had found in the wreckage, but a person, a survivor, someone who was learning how to live again. And every time she looked at him with a glimmer of trust in her eyes, Elias knew that her journey wasn't just about healing from her chains. It was about discovering what freedom truly meant. Elias had just finished his usual morning rounds when the alarms on the Sparrow Light rang out. Cora, his AI assistant, was the first to respond. "Captain, we have an incoming vessel," Cora reported. "Unidentified ship. It's approaching quickly." Elias's heart sank. The timing couldn't have been worse. He'd been expecting trouble, but not so soon. He quickly looked at Sirah, who had been sitting near the controls, silently watching the stars. She looked up at him with wide eyes, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Stay close," Elias said, his voice calm, but there was an edge of concern in it. He activated the ship's defensive systems, just in case. Sirah stood up and followed him, as she had always done. Even after all this time, she still stayed close to him. Elias could see the nervousness in her posture, her shoulders slightly hunched, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to reach out for something, anything, for comfort. The mysterious ship came into view on the monitors. It was large, almost double the size of the Sparrow Light, with dark hull plating that reflected the distant stars. There was no mistake now. This was no ordinary ship. It belonged to the species who had once imprisoned Sirah. "This isn't good," Elias muttered to himself, his mind racing. He knew they were here for one thing, Sirah. The last thing he wanted was a confrontation, but he wouldn't let them take her back. Not after everything they had been through. The communication system buzzed to life. "This is the starship Tyrannus. We demand the immediate return of the subject aboard your vessel. She is property of the Zerosian Collective." Elias's jaw tightened. The Zerosians. He had learned a lot about them over the past few weeks, an aggressive species known for their bioengineering experiments. They didn't value life the way humans did. To them, Sirah was nothing more than a failed project, a piece of technology to be reclaimed. "I'm not giving her back," Elias said, his voice firm. "You can tell your commanders whatever you want. She's free now." The message went. Silent, but Elias could feel the tension building. The Zerosians weren't known for their diplomacy. If they wanted Sirah back, they wouldn't hesitate to take her by force. "We need a plan," Elias muttered to Cora, pacing around the ship's control room. Cora's voice was calm. "The enemy ship is heavily armed. Our only chance of escape is to outrun them." Elias hesitated. Running wasn't always the best option, but he didn't want to risk a fight. He glanced at Sirah, who had been standing quietly by the door, her eyes flicking between Elias and the view screen. "They won't hurt you, Sirah," Elias said softly, trying to reassure her. But he wasn't sure if he believed that himself. The Zerosians had already shown their cruelty. Sirah's gaze held his for a long moment. Then, slowly, she spoke, her voice still soft but clearer than before. I go with you." Elias's heart clenched. She wasn't just a frightened survivor anymore. She had chosen to stay by his side, and now she was showing him the strength he had never realized she possessed. She wasn't going to run from her past any longer. She was going to face it. But facing the Zerosians wasn't going to be easy. He couldn't let them take her. "All right," Elias said, taking a deep breath. "We're going to fight this. Cora, prepare the defenses. I need to know if we can get a clear shot at their engines." Cora quickly scanned the enemy ship. "Their shields are stronger than ours, Captain. However, I can provide you with an opening in their system. You'll have one chance to disable their weapon systems." Elias nodded, steeling himself. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was all they had. The Zerosians had made a dangerous mistake, underestimating the human spirit. The Tyronus ship's communications flickered again. "We will give you one last chance to return the subject peacefully," the voice boomed over the intercom. "If you do not comply, we will force the issue." Elias didn't respond. Instead, he moved to the controls and activated the ship's engines. The Sparrow light lurched forward, engines roaring to life. The distance between them and the Tyronus closed quickly. Elias glanced back at Sirah, who had quietly taken a seat next to him. Her hand trembled slightly, but her eyes were no longer filled with fear. There was a resolve in them now. A quiet strength that Elias admired. He couldn't protect her forever, but he could give her this chance, the chance to fight for her freedom, to stand with him. The battle began. With a quick push of a button, Elias targeted the enemy ship's engines. He fired a concentrated blast, hitting their power core. The Tyronus ship shuddered, its shields flickering. "Now, Cora," Elias shouted. Cora immediately sent a countersignal to the enemy ship's weapon systems, disabling their main guns. The enemy ship veered off course, momentarily stunned. Elias saw the chance and took it. He pushed the throttle forward, guiding the Sparrow light into a sharp turn to gain distance. They were escaping. As they sped away from the disabled Tyronus ship, Elias let out a sigh of relief. They had made it. For now. Sirah looked at him, her expression unreadable. But then she smiled, a small, soft smile that warmed Elias's heart. "Free," she whispered, and Elias, for the first time in a long while, truly believed it. After the close call with the Tyronus, the Sparrow light drifted through the blackness of space, a quiet ship in a quiet corner of the galaxy. The immediate danger had passed, but Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Tyronus would recover. They wouldn't forget about Sirah. They might not even stop until they found her again. But for now, they were safe. The stars outside seemed to shimmer with new possibilities. Elias had always been a loner, a salvager without much to his name but his ship and his freedom. But now, with Sirah by his side, things felt different. She wasn't just a survivor. She was his friend, his ally, someone whose strength and quiet courage had begun to feel like a lifeline. Sirah had changed, and Elias had changed too. In the days following their escape, they had become more than just a pair of strangers bound by circumstance. They had become a team. Siraha still hadn't spoken much, but she was more confident now. She helped Elias with small tasks around the ship, watching his every move and picking up skills faster than he'd ever imagined. She wasn't afraid to be near the control panel anymore. She would sit next to him, watching as he navigated through asteroid fields or made course adjustments. Sometimes, when he glanced over at her, he would catch her looking at him, not with the same fear she had once held, but with a quiet understanding, as though she were beginning to trust herself, to believe in her own strength again. It was a slow, careful journey, but Elias could see the change in her every day. One evening, as they floated among the stars, Elias sat at the table, going over the ship's navigation maps. Sirah was nearby, leaning over a small terminal Cora had set up for her. The AI had created a special learning program for her, teaching her about different star systems, the various species, and the history of the galaxy. Elias didn't know if Sirah understood all of it, but she seemed to enjoy the lessons. It was as though she was reclaiming a piece of herself she'd lost long ago. "Captain?" Cora's voice interrupted his thoughts. "We have a transmission. Coming in. It's not from the Tyronas, but it appears to be from another unknown ship." Elias raised an eyebrow. Unknown ships were never a good sign, but he had learned to trust Cora's analysis. He quickly accessed the communication system and opened the message. The holographic image of a woman appeared before him. She was human, though Elias could tell from the background of her transmission that she wasn't from any human colony he had ever heard of. Her uniform was sleek, a soft blue that shimmered like the sky at dusk. Her short hair was dark, her face calm but serious. "I am Captain Aria Thorne of the Starborn Alliance," the woman said, her voice clear. "I come with a message of peace. We've been watching your movements, Elias Vorn, and we know about the girl you've rescued. We believe you and she might have a future with us." Elias straightened, his interest piqued. He had heard of the Starborn Alliance, an organization dedicated to helping oppressed species across the galaxy, working as peacekeepers, allies, and negotiators. They were known for their kindness and wisdom, their approach always nonviolent. Sirah, who had been sitting quietly by the terminal, looked up at the sound of the voice. Her eyes flickered with curiosity, but she didn't say anything. Elias could see her tension, the way she was still unsure of who to trust, but he could also see the hope in her gaze. "What do you want with us?" Elias asked, his voice cautious but interested. "And how do you know about Sirah?" Captain Thorne smiled softly, though there was a knowing sadness in her eyes. "We've been tracking the Tyronas for years," she explained. "We know about their experiments. We know about the beings they've taken and altered. And we've been trying to help the survivors, the ones they've abandoned, the ones who still fight to be free." Sirah's hands tightened on the armrest of her chair. Elias glanced at her, but she didn't look frightened. Instead, she looked thoughtful. "There are more like me?" Sirah asked softly, the first time she had spoken in nearly a day. Captain Thorne's face softened. "Yes, Sirah. There are others, and we want to help them. If you're ready, we can offer you a place with us. You don't have to hide anymore. You can live without fear, surrounded by others who understand." Elias watched Sirah closely. He could see the internal struggle in her eyes. She was still learning to trust, still unsure of what freedom meant, but she wasn't alone anymore, and there was something about the Starborn Alliance that felt right. They wanted to help. They wanted to offer a future, not just to Sirah, but to all the others who had suffered as she had. "I'm ready," Sirah said quietly, her voice steady. "I want to help." Elias felt a surge of pride. She was choosing her future, choosing to move forward. And for the first time, Elias realized that he wasn't just helping her anymore. She was helping him too. He turned back to Captain Thorne. "We're in. What do we need to do?" Captain Thorne's smile widened. "Welcome to the Starborn Alliance. We'll meet you at the coordinates I'm sending you now. Prepare for the next chapter of your journey." As the transmission ended, Elias sat back, his mind racing. They were not alone anymore. The future was full of unknowns, but it was also full of possibilities. And Sirah wasn't the only one ready to face it. The days that followed felt like a turning point for both Elias and Sirah. They were heading to a new place, a new life, a new chapter. The coordinates Captain Thorne had given them were leading them toward the heart of the Starborn Alliance. It was a place where peace was more than just a word. It was the foundation of their society, a place where Sirah could finally find the freedom and safety she had longed for. Elias looked at the navigational map on the ship's console as the sparrow light glided through the vastness of space. The stars outside were distant, cold, and bright, but there was warmth in Elias's chest. It wasn't just because he was finally part of something bigger than himself. It was because of the quiet strength he saw growing in Sirah. She had come a long way from the frightened, broken girl he had rescued from the wreckage. The girl who couldn't trust anyone, the one who hid in shadows, afraid of the world outside. Now, she walked beside him with a calm confidence. She helped with the ship's systems, learning the layout of the vessel and asking questions about everything: how things worked, why they worked that way, what each button on the control panel did. She had a natural curiosity that Elias admired. It reminded him of his younger self, eager, ready to understand, ready to grow. Sirah still wasn't speaking much, but Elias could see the change in her every day. She was no longer the girl who hid in the corner. She was becoming someone who could stand on her own, someone who could speak for herself, not just through the words she had learned, but through her actions. One day, after Elias had finished checking the ship's hull for any damage, Sirah came up to him, holding a small glowing object in her hand. It was a data chip, one of the old ones, covered in alien symbols. "What is this?" Elias asked, intrigued. He had never seen this type of chip before. It wasn't human tech. It didn't belong to the Zerosians either. Sirah looked at the chip, then at Elias. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking to the floor, then back to him. I know this," she said, her voice still soft but clearer than before. Elias raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You do?" Sirah nodded slowly. "From before. They used these to track, to find." Elias frowned. "Who? The Zerosians?" She nodded again, holding the chip tightly in her hand. "Yes, but it is broken now. It doesn't work." Elias took a step closer, his eyes searching her face. "What do you want to do with it?" Sirah looked at him, her expression serious. "Destroy it. I don't need it anymore." Elias smiled gently. "You're right. You don't." With that, Sirah moved to the ship's trash disposal system and threw the chip in. There was no hesitation in her movement. It was as though she had finally let go of something from her past, something that no longer had a hold over her. Later that evening, as they sat in the small common area of the ship, Elias couldn't help but notice how much more comfortable Sirah seemed. She wasn't sitting off to the side anymore, watching him from a distance. Now she sat beside him, sharing the quiet moments, looking out the window at the endless sea of stars. "You know," Elias said as he looked over at her, "you've come a long way since we first met. I've never seen anyone adapt as quickly as you have." Sirah smiled softly, though it wasn't one of those wide smiles that humans often shared. It was quiet, subtle, but full of meaning. "You helped me," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I learned because you showed me. You didn't leave me." Elias smiled back, feeling warmth in his chest. "I wouldn't leave you. You're not alone anymore, Sirah." She nodded, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, the world outside seemed to stop. They weren't just a captain and a survivor anymore. They were partners, each with their own past, their own struggles, but now together. They shared a future. They shared their journey. As they continued their journey toward the Starborn Alliance, Elias couldn't help but think about how much had changed. Not just for Sirah, but for him as well. He had always been a loner, never wanting to get too close to anyone. But now, with Sirah by his side, he realized how much he had missed the companionship, the feeling of having someone to share the quiet moments with. When they arrived at the coordinates Captain Thorne had provided, Elias saw it. The Starborn Station. It was a massive space station, glowing softly against the backdrop of the stars. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. It wasn't just a place of technology and power. It was a place of hope, of peace, of new beginnings. As the Sparrow Light approached, Sirah stood beside Elias, her eyes wide with wonder. She had never seen anything like this before, not in the prison cells, not in the places she had once been. This was freedom. This was a chance. And she wasn't afraid anymore. "Ready?" Elias asked, turning to her with a smile. Sirah looked at him, her face filled with something new, hope, certainty, and a little bit of excitement. "Ready," she said softly. Together, they guided the ship toward the Starborn Alliance station, ready to start a new life, a life that was finally their own. The Starborn station loomed ahead like a beacon in the void, a symbol of everything Elias and Sirah had fought for. As the Sparrow Light neared the station's lights flickered to life, casting a warm glow across the dark space around them. This was the first time Sirah had seen such a place. It was peaceful, quiet, almost serene, and it was about to become her new home. Elias glanced at Sirah, who stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the station. Her expression was calm, but there was something else in her eyes, something he had seen before, back when she had first woken up on his ship. The quiet determination of someone who had been through more than their fair share of pain, but was still moving forward, ready to face whatever came next. "You okay?" Elias asked gently, his voice soft. Sirah nodded without looking away from the station. "I'm okay," she said quietly. They had come a long way since that first day on the wrecked ship, when she had been nothing more than a broken girl trapped in a stasis pod. Now she was standing here, stronger, calmer, and more confident than ever. Elias had seen her change, little by little. He had watched her take control of her own life, piece by piece, just as he had promised. "I can't believe we're finally here," Elias said, his voice full of wonder. "It feels like a dream, doesn't it?" Sirah turned to look at him, her eyes soft but full of understanding. "It doesn't feel like a dream," she said. "It feels real." Elias smiled. She was right. For so long, he had lived his life alone, floating from job to job, running from his past. He had never really had a place he could call home. But now, with Sirah by his side, he felt like he was part of something that mattered. As the Sparrow Light docked with the station, Elias felt a sense of relief wash over him. The struggle was finally over. Sirah was free. They were both free. And for the first time in a long time, Elias felt like he had a future with someone he cared about. The station's docking bay doors opened, and the soft hum of the station's air systems greeted them. A team of Starborn officers stood at the entrance waiting to greet them. They were dressed in soft blue uniforms, their expressions warm and welcoming. Captain Thorne was there too, standing at the front of the group, her smile bright. "Welcome to the Starborn Alliance," Captain Thorne said, stepping forward as Elias and Sirah disembarked from the Sparrow Light. "We're so glad to have you here." Elias gave her a small smile. "Thank you," he said. "We've been looking forward to this." Sirah stood beside him, her gaze scanning the new environment, her eyes filled with wonder. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had come so far from the scared girl she had once been. Now, she stood tall and proud, ready to begin her new life. "Captain." Thorn's gaze shifted to Syrah, and her smile softened. "You've made it," she said gently. "You're safe now." Syrah nodded slowly, her expression unreadable, but Elias could see the quiet strength in her eyes. She was no longer the girl who had been hidden away in a pod, chained to a past she couldn't escape. She was someone who had chosen to move forward, to take control of her own life. "You don't have to hide anymore, Syrah," Elias said softly, his voice full of emotion. "You're free. You can live your life however you want." Syrah turned. To him, her eyes searching his face. For a moment there was silence between them, a deep understanding that passed between them without the need for words. Then Syrah smiled. A small, quiet smile that meant more to Elias than any words ever could. "I know," she said simply, "and I want to." Captain Thorn stepped forward, her expression warm. "There's a place for both of you here. You're welcome to stay with us as long as you like." Syrah looked at Elias, and for the first time in a long time, her eyes were filled with a quiet certainty. She had a place here. She had a future, and she wasn't alone. "We'll stay," Elias said, his voice steady. He looked at Syrah, his heart full. "We're not going anywhere." The words were simple, but they meant everything. He wasn't just offering Syrah a place in his life. He was offering her a future where she could live without fear, without the chains of her past holding her back. Syrah smiled again, a little brighter this time. She reached for Elias's hand, and he didn't hesitate to take it. For the first time, Elias realized that the past was behind them. The fight, the struggles, the uncertainty, all of it was behind them. They had made it. They had both fought for this, and now they had a chance to build a life, and they would build it together. As they walked forward side by side into the Starborn station, Elias couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him. The journey had been long, and there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time, he felt like he had found something worth fighting for. Syrah had come into his life when he least expected it, and together they had become more than just two survivors. They had become a family, something Elias had never truly known. But now, with Syrah by his side, he knew that this was where he was meant to be. And as they stepped into the new world before them, Elias knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. And that was enough.